The year was 1876, and the American frontier stood on the edge of another bloody conflict. Smoke from burned homesteads drifted across the open plains, while rumors of raids and revenge spread faster than the wind. Settlers lived in constant fear, and the Apache people, driven from their ancestral lands, fought fiercely to protect what remained of their home. Between the two sides stood fragile promises of peace that had been broken too many times to count. In the small frontier town of Red Creek, 18-year-old Clara Whitmore watched the world she had always known begin to crumble. The daughter of Governor Henry Whitmore, she had grown up inside a large wooden house overlooking the valley. Her life had been comfortable compared to that of most families living on the frontier. She had learned to read, play the piano, and tend the rose garden her late mother had loved so dearly. Yet no amount of education or refinement could shield her from the harsh realities surrounding the settlement. One chilly evening, Clara noticed unusual activity inside her father's office. Soldiers hurried through the halls carrying maps and sealed letters. The governor's advisors spoke in anxious whispers, and every face wore the same expression of worry. Something terrible had happened. Unable to ignore her curiosity, Clara quietly approached the office door. Through the narrow opening, she heard voices raised in heated argument. "We cannot survive another war," one councilman insisted. "Our supplies are nearly exhausted." Another answered grimly, "Chief Takota has united several Apache bands. If peace fails now, neither side will escape the bloodshed." Her father's voice, usually calm and commanding, sounded tired. "There is only one proposal Chief Takota has agreed to consider." The room fell silent. Finally, another man asked, "You truly intend to offer your own daughter?" Clara's heart stopped. She stepped away from the door, struggling to breathe. Surely she had misunderstood. Her father would never use her life as part of a political bargain. The next morning, Governor Whitmore summoned her to his study. His gray eyes looked older than she had ever seen them. "Sit down, Clara." She remained standing. "What is happening?" The governor sighed deeply before speaking. "The fighting must end. Too many innocent people have died." "What does that have to do with me?" He hesitated, unable to meet her eyes. "Chief Takota has agreed to negotiate peace under one condition. He believes words alone cannot rebuild trust between our people. He has asked for a marriage that will unite both sides." Clara stared at him in disbelief. "You agreed?" "I had no choice." "There is always a choice." The words escaped before she could stop them. Governor Whitmore's shoulders slumped beneath the weight of responsibility. "If I refuse, hundreds more may die before winter. Families will lose their homes. Children will become orphans. I am asking you to help save them." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "You are asking me to sacrifice my entire life." Her father walked toward her slowly. "I know." For several long moments, neither of them spoke. Outside the window, autumn leaves drifted through the cold air, reminding Clara that everything eventually changed, whether anyone wished it or not. Stories about Chief Takota had filled her childhood. Settlers described him as a fearless warrior whose name inspired terror across the frontier. Some claimed he had never lost a battle. Others whispered that he showed no mercy to his enemies. Clara had never met him, yet years of frightening tales painted a terrifying picture in her imagination. That night, she packed her belongings in silence. She folded her dresses carefully into a single trunk and paused when she reached her mother's silver locket. Holding it tightly, she whispered a quiet prayer for courage. At dawn, a small convoy prepared to leave Red Creek. Soldiers mounted their horses while townspeople gathered along the road. Some looked sympathetic, while others regarded Clara with admiration, believing she was making a noble sacrifice for peace. Clara climbed into the wagon without looking back. As the settlement disappeared behind the rolling hills, she felt as though her old life had vanished with it. Ahead lay the vast wilderness, the land of the Apache, and a future she had never chosen. She believed she was riding toward captivity, toward a husband she feared, and toward a destiny shaped by politics instead of love. She could not know that the stories she had believed for so many years were only half the truth, and that beyond the mountains waited a man whose heart was far different from the legend that surrounded his name. The journey across the frontier lasted 5 long days. Each sunrise carried Clara Whitmore farther from the only home she had ever known, and each sunset deepened the uncertainty in her heart. The wagon rolled through endless stretches of grassland, rocky hills, and winding rivers. The soldiers assigned to escort her spoke little, their silence matching the unease that hung over the entire caravan. Clara spent much of the journey staring at the distant mountains. Somewhere beyond them lived Chief Dakota, the man she had been promised to marry. Every frightening story she had heard as a child replayed in her mind. She imagined a fierce warrior with cold eyes and an unforgiving temper, a man who viewed her as nothing more than a prize won through negotiation. On the afternoon of the 6th day, the convoy reached the Apache territory. Clara expected towering walls or heavily guarded gates. Instead, she found a peaceful valley surrounded by rugged cliffs and tall pine trees. A clear stream flowed through the center of the settlement, while children laughed as they chased one another across open fields. Women prepared meals over small fires, and elders sat together weaving baskets and telling stories. Horses grazed nearby, undisturbed by the arrival of strangers. The village was nothing like the savage camp she had imagined. As the wagon stopped, dozens of Apache villagers gathered to observe the newcomers. Their expressions were cautious but calm. Curious eyes followed Clara as she stepped down from the wagon, clutching her mother's silver locket. A respectful silence settled over the gathering. Then someone stepped forward. He was taller than most of the warriors around him, with broad shoulders and steady confidence. His dark hair was neatly braided, and his clothing was simple but finely crafted, decorated with subtle beadwork rather than extravagant ornaments. His face carried the quiet strength of someone accustomed to leadership, and his eyes reflected both wisdom and patience. This was Chief Dakota. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Clara lowered her gaze, expecting harsh words or commands. Instead, Dakota spoke in a calm, measured voice. "Welcome to our home, Clara Whitmore." His English was clear, though touched with a gentle accent. She looked up, surprised. "I know this journey was not one you chose," he continued. "You are our guest before you are anything else." The words caught Clara completely off guard. A young Apache woman stepped forward carrying a woven blanket. "My sister, Ayanna, will show you where you will stay," Dakota explained. "You may rest before we discuss anything further. No orders. No threats. No demands. Only kindness." As Clara followed Ayanna through the village, she noticed something unexpected. The people greeted Dakota not with fear, but with genuine respect. Children ran to him without hesitation, smiling as he greeted each one by name. An elderly man struggling to carry firewood was quickly helped by the chief himself, who lifted the heavy bundle without hesitation. This was not the behavior of the ruthless warrior described in frontier stories. Ayanna led Clara to a comfortable lodge prepared especially for her. Soft blankets covered a raised sleeping platform, and fresh flowers decorated a small wooden table near the entrance. "I hope you will be comfortable here," Ayanna said with a warm smile. "You speak English?" "My mother taught me. We have traded peacefully before, though many choose to forget those days." Her words lingered in Clara's thoughts. That evening, a welcoming meal was held beneath the open sky. Instead of forcing Clara to sit beside Dakota, the chief allowed her to choose where she felt comfortable. The meal was filled with quiet conversation, laughter, and music played on handmade flutes. Families shared food with one another, and no one treated Clara with hostility. Even so, fear still lingered in her heart. After the gathering, Dakota approached her from a respectful distance. "I know today has been difficult," he said. "No one can erase fear in a single day." Clara studied his face carefully. "Why did you agree to this marriage?" she finally asked. Dakota remained silent for a moment before answering. Because peace built only on signatures fades with the wind. Peace built on trust has a chance to endure. His answer was not what she expected. As he walked away, Clara watched him stop to help a young boy retrieve a stray horse before continuing toward the council lodge. For the first time since leaving Red Creek, doubt crept into her certainty. Perhaps the stories she had grown up believing had never revealed the whole truth. Yet despite everything she had seen, one thought continued to haunt her. Their wedding ceremony would take place in only 2 days, and afterward would come the wedding night she feared more than anything. She could only hope that the quiet kindness she had witnessed was real, and not simply the calm before a storm. The morning of the wedding arrived beneath a clear blue sky. Sunlight poured over the valley, casting a warm glow across the Apache village. Unlike the grand church ceremonies Clara had imagined as a little girl, this celebration took place in the open, surrounded by towering pines, flowing water, and the people who called the valley home. Clara stood quietly inside her lodge as Ayanna carefully braided her hair. Tiny beads and soft feathers were woven into the braid, symbols of peace and new beginnings. Instead of the heavy white gown she had expected to wear, she was dressed in a beautifully crafted buckskin dress decorated with delicate beadwork. It was simple, elegant, and made with remarkable care. "You look beautiful," Ayanna said with a gentle smile. Clara looked down at the unfamiliar clothing. "I hardly recognize myself." "Sometimes," Ayanna replied, "a new path begins when we stop looking only at who we were." Those words stayed with Clara as she stepped outside. The entire village had gathered near a circle of ancient oak trees. Elders stood together, children watched with wide eyes, and warriors formed a respectful line around the ceremony. There was no shouting, no celebration of conquest, and no sign that anyone viewed her as a prisoner. When Chief Dakota approached, he wore ceremonial clothing that reflected both dignity and humility. A finely beaded sash rested across his shoulders, but there was no golden crown or display of wealth. His authority came from the respect of his people, not from ornaments. The village elder began the ceremony in the Apache language before repeating the meaning in English for Clara. "This union is not the joining of a ruler and a captive," the elder said. "It is the joining of two hearts asked to carry the hope of two nations." Clara slowly lifted her eyes toward Dakota. He met her gaze with quiet reassurance, never demanding a smile she could not yet give. When the vows were spoken, Dakota's voice remained calm and steady. "I promise to protect your dignity as faithfully as I protect my people." When it was Clara's turn, her voice trembled. "I promise to seek understanding, even when fear tells me to turn away." The elder nodded with approval. As the ceremony ended, the villagers applauded softly. Musicians played flutes and hand drums while families shared food, danced, and laughed together. Children scattered flower petals across the grass, filling the air with color and joy. For everyone else, it was a celebration. For Clara, the greatest challenge still lay ahead. As evening settled over the valley, Ayanna accompanied her to the entrance of Dakota's lodge. "You are afraid," Ayanna said quietly. Clara nodded. "I won't lie to you." Ayanna gently squeezed her hand. "My brother is a good man. Judge him by what he does, not by the stories others have told." With that, she stepped away. Clara took a deep breath before entering. Inside, a small fire crackled gently in the center of the lodge. The warm light danced across woven blankets and carved wooden shelves. Everything felt peaceful. Dakota was seated near the fire. As soon as he saw her, he rose to his feet. "You may sit wherever you feel comfortable," he said. Clara hesitated before choosing a place several feet away. Silence filled the room. Finally, Dakota spoke. "I know what you've been told about me." Clara looked at him but remained quiet. "You were taught to fear me." She slowly nodded. "I cannot erase years of stories in one conversation," he continued. "But I can choose how I treat you from this day forward." He reached into a small wooden chest and placed a folded blanket beside the fire. You do not have to share this space with me tonight if you are uncomfortable. There is another sleeping place prepared for you. Clara blinked in surprise. You mean? I have a choice. Dakota smiled gently. Marriage without respect is only another form of captivity. I will never ask for your trust. It must be given freely, or it means nothing. For the first time since arriving in the valley, the tightness in Clara's chest began to ease. The hours passed not in silence but in conversation. Dakota spoke of his childhood, of learning from his father to lead with patience instead of anger, and of the responsibility he carried after losing members of his family during years of conflict. Clara shared memories of her mother, her love of books, and the rose garden she had left behind in Red Creek. As they talked, Clara realized something extraordinary. The man sitting across the fire was not the monster she had imagined. He laughed quietly at childhood memories, spoke with compassion about his people, and dreamed of a future where children, Apache and settler alike, would never have to fear war again. When the fire burned low, Dakota stood. You should rest. Tomorrow will be a new beginning. Clara watched him spread his own blanket on the opposite side of the lodge, honoring every promise he had made. As she lay awake beneath the soft blankets, she realized that the terror she had carried into the lodge had quietly faded. In its place was something unexpected. Not love, not yet. But the first fragile spark of trust, born from kindness instead of fear, and strong enough to begin changing both her heart and her future. The days following the wedding settled into a peaceful rhythm that Clara had never expected. Each morning, the valley awakened with the songs of birds and the distant sound of horses galloping across the open fields. Instead of feeling like a prisoner, Clara found herself slowly becoming part of the life around her. Although many customs were unfamiliar, the people treated her with patience. Ayanna became both her teacher and her closest friend, helping her learn simple Apache words and explaining the traditions that had been passed down through generations. Clara discovered that every ceremony, every pattern woven into a blanket, and every story shared around the evening fire carried meaning. Nothing was done without purpose. At first, Clara worried she would never belong. Whenever she made mistakes with the language or misunderstood a custom, she expected laughter or criticism. Instead, the villagers simply smiled and encouraged her to try again. You learn with your heart, Ayanna often said. That matters more than learning quickly. Meanwhile, Chief Dakota never pressured Clara to become someone she was not. He continued leading his people with quiet confidence, settling disputes between families, organizing hunting parties, and meeting with neighboring tribal leaders. Yet no matter how busy he became, he always found time to ask Clara how she was adjusting. One afternoon, he invited her to ride with him through the valley. Clara had learned horseback riding as a child, but the rugged trails winding through the mountains were unlike anything she had experienced before. Dakota noticed her uncertainty and slowed his horse to match her pace. There is no race, he said with a smile. The mountains have waited centuries. They can wait another hour. His calm humor made Clara laugh for the first time since arriving in the valley. As they reached a ridge overlooking the river below, Dakota pointed toward the forest stretching beyond the hills. My father brought me here when I was your age, he said. He told me a leader must know every part of the land, because the land feeds the people. Clara admired the breathtaking view. It is beautiful, she whispered. It belongs to no king, Dakota replied. We belong to it. His words revealed a way of thinking completely different from the world in which she had been raised. In return, Clara began sharing pieces of her own life with him. During quiet evenings, she brought out the few books she had packed from home and taught Dakota to read more complex English. Though he already understood the language well, he had rarely studied written texts. Patiently, she traced each word with her finger. This says, freedom, she explained. Dakota repeated the word carefully before smiling. A powerful word. It should belong to everyone. He looked at her thoughtfully. I believe that too. Their lessons soon became a treasured routine. Some evenings Dakota taught Clara the names of native plants and the stars that guided travelers across the plains. Other nights she read stories aloud while he listened with genuine curiosity. Slowly, friendship grew where fear had once lived. Yet beyond the peaceful valley, danger still lingered. Reports arrived that dishonest traders were selling weapons to outlaws while spreading false stories blaming Apache warriors for attacks they had never committed. Certain military officers, eager for another campaign, seemed determined to convince settlers that peace had already failed. One evening, Dakota gathered his council. If lies continue, one elder warned, both sides will return to war. Clara listened carefully. What if the settlers heard the truth directly, she suggested. The council turned toward her. We have trusted only soldiers and politicians to carry messages, she continued. Perhaps it is time for ordinary families to meet one another instead. Dakota considered her idea. Days later, with his support, a small gathering was arranged between Apache families and nearby settlers who still believed peace was possible. Though everyone arrived cautiously, children soon began playing together while their parents shared meals and stories. Barriers that had existed for years began to weaken. Watching the scene unfold, Dakota turned to Clara. You saw a path none of us considered. Clara smiled. And you gave me the chance to walk it. For the first time, they no longer felt like strangers forced together by circumstance. They had become partners. That evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, they stood side by side overlooking the valley. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Dakota broke the silence. When you first arrived, I feared you would spend your life wishing to leave. Clara looked at the peaceful village below, where laughter echoed through the cool evening air. I did, she admitted softly. Every single day. She paused before continuing. But somewhere along the way, this place stopped feeling like a prison. Dakota met her eyes. And what does it feel like now? Clara smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. It feels like home. For the first time since their unlikely marriage began, neither fear nor duty stood between them. Only respect, friendship, and a growing love that neither of them had expected to find. For nearly 6 months, peace flourished in the valley. Trade between the Apache and nearby settlements slowly resumed. Farmers exchanged grain for handcrafted blankets and leather goods. Children who had once hidden at the sight of strangers now played together during seasonal gatherings. Though not everyone trusted the new alliance, hope had begun to replace fear. Clara and Chief Dakota had become symbols of that hope. Yet peace often attracts those who profit from conflict. Far to the east, Colonel Nathan Briggs watched the growing friendship between settlers and the Apache with growing frustration. A decorated military officer, Briggs had built his reputation on campaigns against native tribes. If lasting peace took hold, his influence, and the funding for his soldiers, would disappear. He found willing partners in a group of dishonest traders who had secretly been smuggling weapons and stealing supplies meant for frontier settlements. War kept their pockets full. Peace threatened everything they had gained. We cannot allow this treaty to survive, Briggs told them during a private meeting inside an abandoned trading post. One trader nodded. If the settlers believe the Apache have broken their promises, they'll demand retaliation. And once the first shot is fired, Briggs replied coldly, no one will remember who started it. Within days, mysterious attacks began along isolated trails. Supply wagons disappeared, ranches were robbed, and survivors reported seeing riders wearing feathers and carrying Apache-style weapons. The stories spread quickly. Angry settlers blamed Dakota's warriors. But something didn't make sense. When Clara visited one of the damaged settlements with Dakota to offer assistance, she noticed details that everyone else overlooked. The hoof prints around the burned wagons were made by horses fitted with military horseshoes, not the lighter shoes commonly used by the Apache. A broken cartridge case lying near a fence belonged to a rifle issued to U.S. soldiers, not to weapons typically carried by Dakota's people. Someone was carefully staging the attacks. That evening, Clara shared her observations with Dakota. "I don't believe your people are responsible," she said firmly. Dakota studied the cartridge she had recovered. "Neither do I. If we're right, someone wants both sides to destroy each other." Dakota immediately called a council meeting. His warriors volunteered to patrol the borders without provoking conflict, while trusted messengers quietly gathered information from nearby settlements. Several days later, one of the scouts returned with alarming news. A shipment of stolen military uniforms had been traced to an abandoned mining camp deep in the hills. Clara insisted on accompanying the investigation. "It may be dangerous," Dakota warned. "So is doing nothing," she replied. "If we fail, everything we've built will disappear." Reluctantly, Dakota agreed. Under the cover of darkness, a small group rode toward the deserted camp. Hidden behind weathered buildings, Clara overheard Colonel Briggs speaking with the traders. "Tomorrow," Briggs said, "we attack another settlement and leave Apache arrows behind. By week's end, there'll be a war neither side can stop." Clara's heart pounded. They had proof. Carefully, she backed away to warn Dakota. But before she could reach the horses, a loose stone rolled beneath her boot. The sharp sound echoed through the camp. "There," one outlaw shouted. Clara ran. Gunshots rang through the night as she raced toward the trees. Branches scraped her arms, and her breathing grew ragged. Just as she reached the edge of the forest, two men blocked her path. "There'll be no warning tonight," one of them sneered. They seized her before she could escape. When Dakota realized Clara had not returned, dread tightened in his chest. Without hesitation, he organized a rescue. "We ride now," he ordered. One elder cautioned, "It could be a trap." Dakota tightened his grip on the reins. "Then we face it together." Guided by Clara's abandoned horse, the warriors surrounded the mining camp before dawn. Dakota called out one final warning. "Release her peacefully, and no more blood needs to be spilled." Briggs answered with a rifle shot. The battle erupted instantly. Apache riders moved swiftly through the rocky terrain, using the land to their advantage. Outlaws scattered in panic as Dakota's warriors outmaneuvered them. Amid the chaos, Dakota fought his way into the main building where Clara was being held. Their eyes met across the room. "You came," Clara whispered, relief flooding her face. "I gave you my word," Dakota replied as he freed her bonds. "I intend to keep every promise." Together, they escaped as Briggs and the remaining conspirators were captured after a brief struggle. Documents found inside the camp exposed months of stolen supplies, forged reports, and plans to provoke war for personal gain. When the evidence was presented to both Apache leaders and settlement officials, the truth could no longer be denied. The attacks had never been the work of Dakota's people. Standing beside Clara before representatives from both communities, Dakota looked across the gathered crowd. "Peace is not protected by weapons alone," he said. "It survives when people choose truth over fear." Clara reached for his hand without hesitation. This time, there was no uncertainty between them. They faced the future not as strangers brought together by duty, but as husband and wife, united by trust, courage, and a love strong enough to withstand even those who sought to tear their world apart. The capture of Colonel Nathan Briggs and his fellow conspirators marked a turning point for everyone living along the frontier. The letters, forged reports, and stolen military supplies recovered from the abandoned mining camp left little room for doubt. The attacks that had nearly destroyed the fragile peace had been carefully planned by men who valued power and profit over human lives. When the evidence reached the territorial authorities, Briggs was stripped of his command and arrested to stand trial. The dishonest traders who had helped him were sentenced for their crimes, and the settlements that had once blamed the Apache publicly acknowledged the truth. For the first time in many years, suspicion began to give way to understanding. A month later, representatives from neighboring settlements traveled to the Apache Valley for a historic council. Ranchers, merchants, military officials, tribal elders, and community leaders gathered beneath the ancient oak trees where Clara and Dakota had exchanged their vows. The meeting was unlike any before it. Instead of arguing over land or demanding revenge, both sides discussed schools, trade routes, farming, and ways to settle future disagreements without violence. It was slow, difficult work, but it was a beginning. During the gathering, Governor Henry Whitmore arrived from Red Creek. It had been nearly a year since Clara had seen her father. As she stepped toward him, she noticed how much older he looked. His once dark hair had turned almost completely gray, and the burden he had carried for so long seemed written across his face. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Governor Whitmore removed his hat and lowered his head. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. Clara looked at him with surprise. "I believed I was saving lives," he continued. "But I never stopped to ask what it would cost my own daughter." Tears filled Clara's eyes. "It wasn't an easy path," she admitted. "I know." He glanced toward Dakota, who stood respectfully a short distance away. "I judged him without ever knowing him." Dakota stepped forward and extended his hand. "The future cannot be built by living inside yesterday's mistakes." The governor accepted the handshake. In that simple gesture, years of distrust began to fade. As the seasons passed, Clara embraced her role as a bridge between two worlds. She organized gatherings where settler families and Apache children learned from one another. She helped establish a small school where lessons included both English and Apache traditions, believing that understanding another culture was the strongest foundation for lasting peace. Dakota ruled with the same quiet wisdom that had first surprised Clara on the day they met. He encouraged cooperation rather than conquest and reminded his people that strength was measured not only by courage in battle but also by compassion in times of peace. Their partnership became known throughout the frontier. Travelers who visited the valley often arrived expecting stories of fear and conflict. Instead, they found thriving farms beside open grasslands, busy trading posts filled with friendly conversation, and children from different backgrounds laughing together without the prejudices of earlier generations. One warm summer evening, Clara and Dakota climbed the ridge overlooking the valley where they had once shared one of their earliest conversations. The sun dipped slowly behind the mountains, painting the sky with shades of gold, crimson, and violet. "It has changed," Clara said softly. Dakota smiled. "So have we." She laughed. "I still remember arriving here convinced I was walking into a prison. And I remember wondering if you would ever smile at me." She reached for his hand, their fingers fitting together as naturally as if they had always belonged that way. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "You had every reason to be. But you never gave me another reason to fear." Dakota looked across the peaceful valley below. "Love cannot grow where fear is forced to stay." Clara rested her head gently against his shoulder. "I thought our wedding night would be the end of the life I wanted." She smiled as she looked at the home they had built together. "It became the beginning of a life I never imagined." Below them, children raced through the fields, their joyful laughter echoing across the valley. Some carried traditions passed down from Apache elders, while others spoke of the customs their settler grandparents had brought west. Together, they represented something far greater than either culture alone, a future shaped by mutual respect instead of inherited hatred. Years later, people would remember Clara Whitmore and Chief Dakota not simply as a governor's daughter and an Apache leader, but as two people who proved that trust could overcome fear, that kindness could outlast prejudice, and that the strongest peace was built not by treaties alone, but by hearts willing to understand one another. And whenever Clara thought back to the night she had entered Dakota's lodge trembling with fear, she smiled. For that was the night her greatest fear quietly became the greatest love of her life.